There was a morning last year when I found myself sitting in my car outside the bank, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I had just withdrawn another $5,000. The fifth time that year, my daughter needed help with her mortgage again. My son's business was struggling, and my grandson, well, he needed tuition money. I told myself I was being a good parent, a good grandparent. I was doing what family does. But as I sat there watching people walk by, I realized something that made my chest tight with a feeling I didn't want to name. I was 73 years old, and I was afraid. Not of dying, not of being alone. I was afraid of running out of money, and the people making me afraid were the people I loved most in this world. That's when everything changed. Now I know what you might be thinking. You're thinking, I'm about to tell you to be selfish, to turn your back on your children, to hoard your money while your family struggles. But that's not what this is about. Not even close. What I'm about to share with you might be the most loving thing you ever do for your children. And it might be the thing that saves your own life. By the end of this conversation, you're going to understand why continuing to financially support your adult children might be hurting them more than helping them. You're going to learn the psychological trap that keeps us giving long after we should stop. And you're going to discover how to have the hardest conversation of your life in a way that brings you closer together, not further apart. Let me take you back to that car, to that moment of realization, because it started with a man I met 3 months earlier named Robert. Robert was 78. I met him at a community center where I volunteer on Thursdays. He was thin, too thin, and he wore the same jacket every week even though winter was coming, and that jacket had seen better days. One afternoon we got to talking. He told me he'd been a successful accountant, owned his home outright, had a decent pension. But there he was, counting quarters to buy a cup of coffee. When I gently asked what had happened, the story poured out of him like he'd been waiting years to tell someone. His daughter had gotten divorced. He helped with her legal fees. Then his son lost his job. Robert covered his rent for 8 months. Then came the grandchildren's private school tuition, then a car repair, then a medical bill, then another business venture that just needed a little seed money, then, 20 years of thens. And now Robert was 78 years old, eating 1 meal a day, and his children were still calling, asking for help. But there was nothing left. Nothing except the shame he felt for saying no, and the deeper shame he felt for having let it go this far. I saw myself in Robert's eyes that day, and it terrified me. Here's what nobody tells you when you become a parent. We spend the first 18 years of their lives trying to teach them to be independent. We celebrate when they take their first steps, when they tie their own shoes, when they get their first job. We tell them proudly that they can stand on their own 2 feet. But then something strange happens. They become adults, and suddenly we panic. We think that if we're not giving them something, providing something, solving something, then we're not being good parents anymore. That's the trap, and it's destroying our generation financially and emotionally. Think about Margaret, 70 years old, living in Ohio. Margaret had always been proud of how close she was to her children. 3 daughters, all living within 20 miles. She saw them often, too often it turned out, because every visit came with a request. One daughter needed help with groceries, another needed money for the kids' activities. The third was behind on her car payment. Margaret said yes every time because she couldn't bear the thought of her daughters struggling when she had money in the bank. But here's what Margaret didn't see. Her daughters weren't learning to budget. They weren't having the hard conversations with their own spouses about their spending. They weren't making the difficult choices that build financial wisdom. Instead, they were learning that Mom would always be there with a checkbook, and Margaret. She was delaying her own medical procedures because she wasn't sure she could afford them. She was living on less so her adult children could live on more. This is the first truth I need you to understand. When we continue to financially support our adult children beyond reasonable emergencies, we're not helping them, we're disabling them. We're telling them, without words, that we don't believe they can make it on their own. And we're teaching our grandchildren that financial responsibility is optional because someone will always bail you out. The psychology behind this runs deep. Our generation, we were raised with certain values. Family takes care of family. You don't let your children suffer. You sacrifice for those you love. These aren't bad values. They built strong communities and strong families. But somewhere along the way, we confused support with enablement. We confused love with money. And our children's generation faces pressures we didn't. Housing costs that have skyrocketed, student loan debt that can reach 6 figures, an economy that shifted under their feet. I understand all of that. I genuinely do. But here's the hard question we have to ask ourselves. Are we helping them adapt to their reality, or are we helping them avoid it? Does this resonate with you? Have you found yourself in this position, wanting so desperately to help that you forget to ask if your help is actually helpful? Let me know in the comments, because you're not alone in this struggle. There's another layer to this that we don't talk about enough, and that's the resentment, the quiet, bitter resentment that grows like mold in a dark corner. I remember talking to a woman named Patricia, 75. She'd been helping her son for years, thousands and thousands of dollars. She never said no, never complained. Until one Sunday dinner, when her son casually mentioned he and his wife were planning a vacation to Europe. Patricia felt something crack inside her chest. She'd been postponing a hip replacement because she was worried about the cost, and her son was going to Paris. She didn't say anything that night. She went home and cried. And the next time he asked for money, she said yes again, because she didn't know how to say no. But the love she felt when she wrote that check wasn't pure anymore. It was tangled up with anger and hurt, and the terrible feeling that she was being used. That's what we do to ourselves. That's what we do to our relationships. We give until we resent, and then we resent that we're resentful because we think good parents shouldn't feel this way. Here's the second truth. Your children can sense your resentment. They might not name it. They might not acknowledge it, but it's there, hanging between you, poisoning something precious. And the longer you continue giving out of guilt instead of genuine desire, the worse it gets. Now let's talk about what this is really costing you. And I don't just mean the money, though that's significant. I mean your future, your health, your peace of mind. Consider James, 72, living in Florida. James had a dream. He wanted to travel. He'd worked for 47 years, saved diligently, and he had a list of places he wanted to see before his body made traveling impossible. But his daughter's family was struggling, so James postponed his trip. Just for a year, he thought. But then there was another crisis, and another, and now James is 72 with a heart condition that makes long flights dangerous, and he's never going to see Ireland. That money he saved? It went to his daughter's kitchen renovation. I need you to sit with that for a moment. James traded his dream for his daughter's granite countertops. The brutal arithmetic of our situation is this. We have limited time left. Limited healthy years, limited resources. Every dollar we give to our adult children who don't truly need it is a dollar we can't use for our own health care, our own quality of life, our own security in what might be decades of old age. And here's what keeps me up at night. When you're 85 and you need care, when you need support, when you've depleted your savings helping your children, who do you think they'll expect to take care of you? Those same children. The children you didn't teach financial independence. The children who learned that resources appear magically when needed. Now they're 50 or 60 years old. They haven't learned to save, and you need expensive care. See the problem? We think we're securing their love by giving them money, but we're actually setting everyone up for a devastating crisis down the road. Then comes the quieter change, the one that happens inside your own mind. It's about identity. For decades, you were the provider, the solver, the one who made things okay. That role gave you purpose. It made you feel needed. And now I'm suggesting you step away from that role, and it can feel like I'm asking you to become irrelevant, to become less necessary to the people you love most. Let me tell you about Helen. 68, 3 grown sons. Helen realized she'd been using money as a way to stay important in her sons' lives. Every time she wrote a check, she was buying a phone call, buying a visit, buying reassurance that they still needed her. When she stopped, she had to face a terrifying question. If I'm not helping them financially, what am I to them? It took Helen 2 years to answer that question. 2 hard years. But here's what she discovered. When she stopped being the bank, she became something better. She became the grandmother who taught her grandchildren to bake, the mother her sons called just to talk to, the woman whose advice was sought because it was wise, not because it came with a check attached. Helen told me something I'll never forget. She said, "I thought they loved me because I gave them things. Turns out they just loved me." This is the third truth, and it might be the most important one. Your value to your family is not measured in dollars. Your children loved you before you had money to give them. They'll love you after. And if they don't, if the relationship only survives because of financial support, then that's information you need to have. Painful information, but necessary. If this one surprised you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Because this shift in thinking, it's probably the hardest part of the entire journey. But that's only part of the picture. There's also the practical question of how to actually stop, how to have this conversation without destroying relationships, how to say no with love. This is where most people falter. They read something like what I'm telling you, they feel convicted, they decide to change, and then they do it in the worst possible way. They get angry, they make their child feel punished. They say things like, "I've done enough for you," or "You need to learn to manage your money," in a tone that drips with judgment. That's not what I'm suggesting, not even close. When I finally had this conversation with my own children, I spent 3 weeks preparing. I wrote down what I wanted to say. I practiced with a friend. I tried to anticipate their reactions. And then I invited them both to lunch, separately, on different days, because these conversations need to be individual. I started by telling them I loved them, that nothing about this was a judgment of them or their lives. Then I told them the truth. I told them about Robert, about my own fears, about the fact that I was 73 years old and I needed to ensure my own security for what might be 20 or 30 more years. I told them that continuing to give them money wasn't sustainable. And more importantly, I'd realized it wasn't actually helping them build the skills they needed for their own futures. My daughter cried. My son got quiet and withdrawn. It was hard, so hard. But I didn't back down. I didn't apologize for my decision. I did apologize for letting it go on too long, for creating a dynamic where they'd come to expect my financial support. That was on me. Then I offered something else instead of money: time, attention, wisdom. I told them I'd help them create budgets if they wanted, that I'd watch the grandkids so they could take extra shifts at work, that I was still their mother and I still wanted to support them, just not financially except in genuine emergencies. And here's what an emergency is, so we're clear. An emergency is medical. It's a roof overhead. It's food on the table. An emergency is not a vacation, a new car, because the old one is embarrassing, private school tuition, or a business venture. Those are wants, and wants are important, but they're not your responsibility anymore. My son took 6 months to really speak to me normally again. It hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. But eventually something shifted. He started managing his money better. He took a second job for a while. He learned to tell his own children no. And about 8 months after our conversation, he called me and said, "Mum, I get it now, thank you." My daughter took longer. She's still sometimes a little cool with me, but her marriage got stronger because she and her husband had to figure things out together instead of relying on me. And she's proud of herself now in a way she wasn't before. Here's the fourth truth. Short-term discomfort creates long-term strength. If you truly love your children, you'll be willing to be uncomfortable, to be the bad guy temporarily, to give them the gift of their own capability. And this leads us to a truth that is often harder to accept, the truth about what we owe our children and what we don't. We owe our children a childhood. We owe them safety, love, education to the best of our ability, and a foundation to build on. We fulfilled that obligation. When they turned 18 or finished college or whatever milestone you choose, the nature of the relationship changed. It had to. They became adults. And adults are responsible for their own lives. This doesn't mean we stop loving them. It doesn't mean we don't care when they struggle. It means we love them enough to let them struggle, to let them fail, to let them figure it out. Because that's how humans develop resilience and competence and self-respect. Think about nature. A butterfly has to struggle out of its cocoon. If you cut the cocoon to help it, the butterfly's wings don't develop properly, and it can't fly. It dies. Our children are the same. The struggle is where the strength comes from. I met a man named David, 76, who told me about his son. The son had a failed business and debt and a family to support. David desperately wanted to pay off his son's debt. He had the money. It would have been easy. But David did something remarkable. He said no to the money and yes to something else. He spent 3 months helping his son create a plan, teaching him what David knew about business and budgeting, being present without being the solution. It took his son 4 years to pay off that debt. 4 hard years, but when he made that final payment, he called his father crying. Not crying because the debt was gone, but crying because he'd done it himself, because he was proud, because he'd learned he was capable of more than he'd thought. David gave his son something money never could have bought. He gave him self-efficacy, the knowledge that he could overcome. And that gift will serve his son for the rest of his life. This is the 5th truth. The best inheritance you can give your children isn't money. It's confidence. It's competence. It's the example of boundaries and self-respect. It's showing them that it's possible to love someone deeply without sacrificing yourself. Now, I know some of you are thinking about specific situations. What if my child is truly struggling? What if there's a disability involved? What if? And those are valid questions. I'm not suggesting we abandon our children in genuine crisis. I'm not suggesting we refuse help when help is truly needed. But here's what I am suggesting. Get honest about the difference between help and enabling. Get honest about whether this is a pattern or a genuine one-time crisis. Get honest about whether your help is leading to growth or dependency. And get honest about what it's costing you, not just financially, but emotionally and physically. Because here's something nobody wants to say out loud. You matter too. Your life matters. Your remaining years matter. Your dreams matter. Your security matters. And it's not selfish to prioritize those things. It's necessary. It's healthy. And ironically, it's the most loving thing you can do for your family. When you model self-respect and boundaries, you teach your children and grandchildren how to have self-respect and boundaries. When you model the truth that love doesn't require self-sacrifice, you break a generational pattern. When you show them that you trust them to handle their own lives, you give them permission to trust themselves. I think about that morning in my car a lot, that moment of realization. If I could go back and talk to myself at 73, sitting there with shaking hands, here's what I'd say. You're not being selfish. You're being wise. You're not abandoning your children. You're believing in them. And you're not failing as a parent. You're succeeding in the hardest lesson of all, the lesson of letting go. It's been 18 months since I had those conversations with my children. My bank account is healthier. I'm sleeping better. I've started taking the art classes I always wanted to take. And my relationships with my children, they're different, sometimes still complicated. But they're more honest, more equal, more like adult friendships and less like transactions. Last month, my daughter called me just to talk. not to ask for anything, just to tell me about her day, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time that had happened before. She was calling because she wanted to, not because she needed to. That phone call was worth more than every check I ever wrote. So here's what I want you to take from this conversation. If you're caught in the cycle of giving, if you're afraid to stop, if you're sacrificing your own future for your adult children's present, you can change. The change will be uncomfortable. It might cause conflict. It will definitely require courage. But on the other side of that discomfort is freedom. Freedom for you and freedom for them. You've spent enough of your life putting everyone else first. You've earned the right to prioritize your own well-being. You've earned the right to enjoy these years without financial fear. And you've earned the right to be loved for who you are, not what you provide. Your children are capable of more than you think. More than they think. Give them the chance to prove it, and give yourself the chance to finally rest. You are not a bad parent for setting boundaries. You're a wise one. You're not being selfish, you're being responsible, and you're not alone in this. Thousands of us are facing the same struggle, making the same difficult choices, choosing love over guilt. So if today is the day you decide to stop, I want you to know I'm proud of you. This conversation we've had, carry it with you. You have permission to put yourself first. You have permission to say no. You have permission to believe in your children enough to let them stand on their own. Your value was never in your wallet. It was always in your heart. And that heart has more than enough love to give without giving everything else away.